the secret code buried in Matthew's end times parables. What if the stories Jesus told weren't just lessons for moral living, but encrypted warnings for the final generation before his return? Imagine discovering that hidden within the parables of Matthew lies a prophetic code, a sequence so precise that it reveals the spiritual condition of the church just before the end. The parable of the 10 virgins isn't just about lamps and oil, it's about believers who think they're ready but are quietly drifting into darkness. The parable of the talents isn't about success, it's about accountability when time runs out. The parable of the sheep and goats isn't about charity, it's about how love itself becomes the final test. These aren't random stories. They are messages deliberately layered by Jesus, spoken in plain sight, yet understood only by those awake enough to listen. Tonight, we'll decode the mystery he buried in his own words, and what it means for every heart waiting for his return. For centuries, believers have read Matthew's parables as gentle stories meant to inspire good behaviour, but Jesus never spoke merely to entertain or to moralise. He was revealing the structure of the kingdom and the conditions of the heart that would be tested at the end of the age. These parables are not random. They form a spiritual timeline that quietly unfolds through Matthew 24 and 25, a pattern of awakening, testing, and revealing. If you've ever felt like the end times prophecies are too complex or too distant, this message will bring it close to home. You'll see how every parable Jesus told carries a living instruction for how to stay awake, how to endure delay, and how to be found faithful when he comes. By the end of this teaching, you won't just understand the stories, you'll feel them come alive in your own walk with Christ. This is not about fear, but about readiness. It's about learning to recognize the heartbeat of heaven in the ordinary choices of your life. Stay until the very end, because the final parable Jesus gave before the cross contains a secret that could transform how you see faith, love, and eternity itself. If you're hungry for biblical truth that both convicts and comforts, this journey through Matthew's hidden code will stir something deep within you. And before we begin, take a moment to subscribe so you can continue walking with us as we explore the mysteries Jesus left for those willing to seek and to stay awake. When Jesus sat with his disciples on the Mount of Olives and began to speak of the end of the age, he did not deliver a list of predictions or a clear calendar of events. Instead, he told a series of stories, parables that, on the surface, seemed simple, but were in fact layered with prophetic meaning. Matthew records them in a sequence that is far from random. Each parable unfolds like a step on a staircase, revealing a deeper level of readiness for those who would follow him in the final generation. The first sign comes through the parable of the fig tree in Matthew 24:32-33. Learn this lesson from the fig tree, Jesus said. When its branch becomes tender and puts out leaves, you know that summer is near. The fig tree has always been a picture of Israel, but it is also a symbol of spiritual awareness. In other words, when new life begins to show, when you see movement in the world, in the church, and in your own heart, it is a sign that the season is shifting. Jesus was saying that the spiritually awake would recognize the changing atmosphere long before others see it. The fig tree reminds us that the end times begin not in chaos, but in awareness. It starts with a stirring of perception, a whisper that something eternal is approaching. Then Jesus moves directly into the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25:1-13. The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. All 10 had lamps, all 10 had some oil, and all 10 expected the bridegroom to come. Yet when he delayed, 5 grew careless. Their lamps began to dim. The tragedy was not that they didn't believe in the coming, it was that they stopped tending their flame. This is the second stage of the hidden code, preparation. The first stage awakens you to the season. The second tests your endurance in waiting. Jesus knew that delay would be the great divider. Many would start strong but fall asleep when the promise seemed too far away. The oil in this parable represents intimacy with him. It's the slow, quiet, daily pouring of your heart before God. You cannot borrow it from another, and you cannot fake its glow. The foolish virgins tried to share oil at the last moment, but the wise knew it doesn't work that way. Relationship cannot be traded. Every believer must cultivate their own secret place, their own depth of communion. The hidden code here is that faith without intimacy will flicker when darkness thickens. Jesus wasn't warning about global events. He was revealing a personal condition. the weariness that causes love to fade before the finish line. The third stage unfolds in the parable of the talents. A man goes on a long journey and entrusts his servants with his wealth, one with 5 talents, one with 2, and one with 1. When he returns, he calls them to account. The faithful have multiplied what was given, the fearful buried it. This story carries the next part of Jesus' sequence, stewardship under delay. Notice again the theme of waiting. The master does not return quickly, and it is in the space of time that true character is revealed. The first 2 servants did not waste the waiting. They worked, trusted, and grew. The third servant allowed fear to rule. He did nothing wrong in the world's eyes, he merely did nothing. In the kingdom, neglect is as serious as rebellion. The code continues. Awareness must lead to intimacy. Intimacy must produce faithfulness. And finally, Jesus concludes with the parable of the sheep and the goats. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, he separates them not by what they claim to believe, but by how they loved. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. The sheep are those who translated intimacy into compassion. They recognized Jesus in the unseen places, in the poor, the suffering, and the overlooked. This final stage of the code shows that readiness is not proven in knowledge or fear, but in love expressed. The progression is complete: awareness, intimacy, faithfulness, compassion. That is the hidden architecture Jesus designed within his parables. For years, many believers have tried to piece together charts and timelines, convinced that if they could just pinpoint the order of events, they would be ready. But Jesus was never after a chart. He was after a church with burning hearts. The code he buried in Matthew is not about counting days but cultivating depth. Each parable exposes a layer of the soul. The fig tree awakens our eyes to the season. The virgins test our passion in delay. The talents test our faithfulness with what we've been given. And the sheep and goats reveal the authenticity of our love. Think about your own life. Have you been scanning the horizon for signs while neglecting the inner garden of your spirit? Have you mistaken awareness for intimacy, or waiting for inactivity? The sequence Jesus gave in these parables was meant to awaken self-examination. The end times are not just cosmic, they're personal. Every believer lives their own miniature apocalypse whenever they face moments that expose their faith, their patience, and their love. There is a story of a woman who spent years watching for world events, following every prophecy update, every headline, every sign. But as she grew more informed, she realized something painful. Her prayer life had withered. She knew the signs of the times, but had lost touch with the one those signs pointed to. That realization became her turning point. She started spending mornings in quiet worship instead of fear-driven research. Her heart softened again. The lamp that had almost gone out began to glow with steady light. This is the message beneath Matthew's code. The parables are not puzzles for the clever, but invitations for the faithful. Jesus was describing a people who would live in the tension of watching and waiting, of action and intimacy, of faith and love. The code is not hidden to keep us guessing. It's hidden to keep us seeking. And only those who seek will see how each story connects like stones in a sacred path, leading the soul from awareness to transformation. So as you hear these parables again, don't read them like distant tales or historical riddles. Read them as letters written directly to this generation, a call to awaken, to refill your lamp, to multiply your faith, and to let your love prove that you truly belong to Him. This is how the hidden code begins to open, not in fear of the end, but in readiness for the bridegroom who is closer than we think. When we look back through the writings of the early church, we find that the great teachers of faith saw something profound in these same parables. They were not obsessed with the sequence of events or the prediction of years. They understood that the power of Jesus' stories was in how they reveal the condition of the heart and the maturity of faith under the pressure of waiting. Origen wrote that the oil in the lamps of the virgins was not material but spiritual, the inner light of divine knowledge sustained by intimacy with Christ. He saw the foolish virgins as those who had zeal without depth, passion without perseverance, emotion without endurance. Their lamps burned bright for a moment, but because they did not know the secret of stillness with God, their fire could not last the night. Augustine looked at the parable of the talents and saw grace measured out in different capacities. He said that each talent represented a measure of divine opportunity given to each believer, some to teach, some to serve, some to comfort others. He warned that comparison destroys stewardship. The servant who hid his talent did so because he compared his gift with another's. Fear and envy suffocated his faith. Augustine's insight reveals another part of the code, that readiness is not about quantity but faithfulness. To be ready for Christ's return is to be at peace with what he has entrusted to you, working quietly with what you have without resentment or pride. John Chrysostom took the parable of the sheep and goats and pointed out that Jesus described no grand miracles, no spectacular achievements, only simple acts of compassion. He said that love is the final interpreter of prophecy because it translates knowledge into action. In his homilies, he warned that doctrine without mercy is like a lamp without oil, brilliant in form but empty of fire. The Church Fathers recognized that Jesus' parables were not scattered lessons but parts of one revelation, that divine truth unfolds in layers: awareness, intimacy, stewardship, compassion. The code is written into the nature of discipleship itself. The theological pattern beneath Matthew's Gospel shows that readiness was never meant to be passive waiting. It is a rhythm of awakening and doing, of holding the tension between expectation and faithfulness. In Luke 12, Jesus said, "Be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning." Peter would later echo this spirit when he wrote, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, but patient with you." To the early believers, waiting for Christ's return was not a pause in the story, it was the proving ground of character. They endured persecution, delay, and misunderstanding, yet their hope burned because their eyes were on eternity. They believed that every delay was an opportunity to grow in grace. They knew that delay reveals devotion. When time stretches and promises seem far off, what remains in the heart becomes visible. Origen wrote that waiting is a fire that purifies the soul, burning away every motive that is not love. The early church lived with an expectancy so alive that even their ordinary days felt charged with eternity. They saw every act of kindness, every moment of prayer, every temptation resisted as a rehearsal for the kingdom to come. Modern Christianity has largely lost that vision. The end times have become a topic for argument or anxiety rather than intimacy. Yet the Fathers remind us that prophecy was meant to purify, not paralyze. The hidden code of Matthew's parables was their blueprint for enduring faith. It told them how to stay awake in seasons of persecution and silence. It guided them when the world mocked their waiting. It showed them that readiness was not about predicting an hour, but living as though it could be any moment. Imagine how different the church would be today if it recovered that rhythm. The fig tree would remind us to discern the spiritual climate around us, not with panic, but with prayer. The virgins would call us to tend the oil of intimacy, keeping our hearts soft before God even when the night feels long. The talents would challenge us to labour with what we have, not wasting time comparing our calling with someone else's. And the sheep and goats would convict us to express love in practical, selfless ways, to let compassion become the language of readiness. The code that Jesus embedded in these parables is less about chronology and more about character. Each story mirrors the stages of sanctification. Awareness awakens the soul, intimacy sustains it, stewardship matures it, compassion perfects it. Together they form a map for the end-time believer, one that leads not to fear of the future but to the fullness of Christ. If you trace this pattern through the writings of the Church Fathers, you will see how consistent it is. They did not divide prophecy from discipleship. They saw them as one reality. To them, to study the end times was to study the end of self, the death of pride, the surrender of comfort, and the awakening of love. They lived as though Jesus might return at any moment, but also as though he might not come for 1,000 years. Their faith was both urgent and patient, fiery and steady, full of hope yet rooted in humility. This balance is the heartbeat of the code. Awareness without intimacy leads to pride. Intimacy without stewardship leads to stagnation. Stewardship without compassion leads to self-righteousness. Compassion without awareness leads to exhaustion. Only when all four move together does the church reflect the rhythm of Christ. That is why Matthew's arrangement of the parables is deliberate. It mirrors the growth of the believer and the maturation of the bride awaiting her bridegroom. Today, when we read these parables through modern eyes, we often stop at information. We analyse the symbols but miss the invitation. The early church read them as a mirror for their souls. They examined their lamps, their hearts and their hands, asking not, "When will he come?" but "Will he find me ready?" That is the question Matthew's hidden code was meant to awaken. So as you reflect on these teachings, let the wisdom of the early believers call you back to the same posture. Watchful, humble and faithful. Let awareness draw you into prayer. Let intimacy fuel endurance. Let stewardship inspire diligence. Let compassion reveal your maturity. These are not fragments of theology. They are the living framework of the kingdom within you. The Church Fathers saw it clearly, and through their words we rediscover that the secret code was never meant to hide truth from us, but to invite us to embody it until the day he returns. There's a story that mirrors these parables in the life of so many believers today. Her name was Sarah, and she had been serving in her church for years. Every Sunday she led worship, attended prayer meetings, and posted verses about the end times on social media. Her Bible was marked and underlined, her shelves filled with books about prophecy. But slowly something began to change. The excitement she once felt when she sang to Jesus started to fade. Her prayers felt mechanical, her worship felt forced, and her joy, once radiant, became replaced by a quiet exhaustion. She couldn't pinpoint when it happened, only that she was tired, not physically, but spiritually. One night she read the parable of the 10 virgins again, and for the first time she saw herself in the story. She had oil once, but it was running out. That night, Sarah cried. Not because she was afraid of the end, but because she realized she had been living busy for Jesus without being close to him. Her life looked full, but her lamp was empty. She thought about how the foolish virgins must have felt, standing outside the door hearing the words, "I don't know you." It wasn't rejection, it was recognition. Jesus knew who they were on the outside but didn't know their hearts. Sarah realized that the code Jesus buried in his parables was meant to reach moments like this. They weren't warnings of wrath, they were invitations to return. Her story captures what many believers silently experience in this generation. We are surrounded by constant information, endless teaching, and digital noise. We know more about prophecy than any generation before us, yet our intimacy with God has become the rarest oil. We can study every headline, every global event, every sign in the heavens, and still miss the whisper of his Spirit in the quiet. The secret code of Matthew's parables speaks directly to this moment in history when distraction has replaced devotion. In Revelation 2, Jesus tells the church of Ephesus, "You have forsaken your first love." He doesn't say they stopped working, he says they stopped loving. The same words echo through the story of Sarah and through countless hearts today. The oil of intimacy runs low not because we lose faith, but because we stop refilling. The foolish virgins believed the bridegroom would come. They just didn't stay ready. It wasn't disbelief that kept them out, it was neglect. Sarah began to change her rhythm. Instead of rushing through mornings to catch up with the world, she began sitting in stillness. She didn't play music or study charts or analyze world events. She simply sat in silence, whispering the name of Jesus, asking him to come close again. And in that stillness, something began to glow inside her. It wasn't emotion, it was peace. The lamp that had nearly gone dark began to flicker again with warmth. She realized that keeping oil wasn't about striving but surrender. It wasn't about doing more for God, but letting him do more within her. The modern church often measures readiness by activity, ministries launched, people reached, programs built. But the parables of Matthew reveal a different standard. Jesus measures readiness by intimacy, faithfulness, and compassion. He's not looking for the busier servants, he's looking for the ones still listening for his voice. The end times aren't a race to predict the future, they're a call to purify our present. There's a quiet moment every believer must face, the moment when you realize your lamp isn't as bright as it used to be. Maybe you still sing, still pray, still believe, but the flame doesn't burn the same. The temptation is to panic, to search for quick fixes, or to borrow someone else's passion. But the oil of the Spirit can't be borrowed. It has to be cultivated in the secret place, through prayer, repentance, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Sarah's story is a parable for our age. She found that the code in Matthew's parables wasn't just about future prophecy but present awakening. Each story speaks to the inward life, the fig tree to awareness, the virgins to intimacy, the talents to obedience, the sheep and goats to compassion. She began to see her daily choices differently. Every act of forgiveness became like adding a drop of oil. Every moment of gratitude, another spark. Every time she paused to love someone unnoticed, the flame grew stronger. And slowly she learned the secret the early church knew, that Jesus is most clearly seen in delay. Waiting reveals whether we want his gifts or his presence. Sarah stopped watching the news for signs and started watching her own heart for signs of love. That was when she discovered that readiness isn't fear-driven but love-driven. The bride doesn't prepare for the wedding because she's afraid of missing it. She prepares because she longs for her groom. The church in every generation has had to rediscover this truth. Faith that endures the long night must be fueled by relationship, not excitement. Prophecy without presence becomes anxiety. But when intimacy returns, peace follows, even when the world trembles. Sarah's transformation didn't happen overnight. There were days when she felt nothing, when silence stretched longer than expected. Yet even then, she stayed, and that staying became her oil. Every believer faces that same decision, to either run on fumes or return for oil. When we do, the parables no longer feel distant or cryptic. They become living realities, mirrors reflecting our own stories. Jesus wasn't warning us about a secret code to decipher. He was revealing the posture of the heart that can endure when others fall asleep. The wise are those who stay present when nothing seems to happen, who keep tending the flame when the night feels endless. Sarah's story is your story too, if you've ever felt weary or spiritually numb. Her awakening shows that it's never too late to refill your lamp. The bridegroom has not come yet, which means there's still time to watch, to return, to listen. The secret code buried in Matthew's parables is not about hidden numbers or conspiracies. It's about hidden love. Love that burns through delay, through doubt, through silence, until it becomes the light that welcomes him back. So if you find yourself tired, restless, or spiritually dim, remember this. Jesus isn't counting how perfectly you've decoded the signs. He's watching for the flame in your heart. The oil is still available, the night is not over. And for those who keep their lamps burning, the bridegroom's arrival will not be a surprise, but a reunion. If something in Sarah's story feels familiar, take a moment right now to pause and breathe. Ask yourself, is my lamp still burning, or have I been living on yesterday's oil? If this message has stirred something in your spirit, click like to let others know they're not alone in their waiting. And I want to hear from you. What part of Jesus' end-time parables speaks to you most deeply? Comment below and share your answer, because your words may encourage someone else who feels their faith flickering. Stay with me until the end, because what Jesus revealed in his final parable before the cross contains a hidden detail that ties all the others together, a key that unlocks the entire code. When Jesus finished the parable of the talents, he immediately told one last story before his arrest, the parable of the sheep and the goats. This was his closing statement, his final message before the cross, and within it lies the culmination of the entire hidden code. It's not about signs in the sky or political movements. It's about how love itself becomes the dividing line of eternity. In Matthew 25:31-46, the Son of Man returns in his glory, seated on his throne, and separates the nations as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. The measure is startlingly simple. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. This is where the code ends and where transformation begins. The wise virgins kept their lamps full, the faithful servants multiplied what they were given, and now the sheep are revealed by the love that overflowed from those very lamps and talents. It's as if Jesus weaves the previous parables together into a living tapestry, showing us that true readiness expresses itself through compassion. The oil of intimacy becomes the light that reveals others, and the talents of stewardship become the hands that serve. In the end, the test isn't theological accuracy or prophetic awareness, it's the hidden proof of love. The scene Jesus describes is both majestic and intimate. All nations gathered, every life weighed, not by fame or ministry, but by acts of mercy. And this is the detail so often missed. The sheep didn't even realize they were serving Christ. Their love had become instinctive. It had moved from duty to nature, from knowledge to embodiment. They were not performing goodness, they were living communion. That is the final level of the code, love so genuine it no longer needs to be commanded. There's a story of a missionary couple who once believed the rapture was imminent. They sold everything, preparing to leave the world behind. But the day came and went, and they were still here. Instead of growing bitter, they began to serve quietly in the slums, caring for orphans and the dying. Years passed. They had no headlines, no followers, no acclaim. One night, while feeding a sick child, the husband whispered, "If Jesus comes tonight, he'll find us here." That simple sentence carried the heart of this parable. Readiness is not proven in waiting, it's proven in love that acts without needing reward. In this final story, Jesus turns the spotlight from anticipation to compassion. The sheep are not perfect people. They are people who have allowed divine love to reshape how they see others. They feed the hungry, visit the lonely, clothe the naked, not to earn favour, but because they have been transformed by intimacy. The same oil that kept their lamps burning becomes the compassion that lights up the darkness around them. The code Jesus buried is revealed in their actions. They reflect the heart of their shepherd. This parable also confronts a danger that creeps into the church, the separation between spiritual devotion and practical mercy. Some have oil but no compassion, others serve but have no intimacy. Jesus binds them together. He shows that love is not sentiment, it is the visible evidence of an invisible flame. When the Son of Man judges, he doesn't ask about theology exams or end-time charts, he asks about love. Did you see me in the least of these? That is the question every believer must face, the final cipher in the pattern of readiness. Think of how profound this is. The code begins with awareness, the fig tree's new leaves, and ends with love embodied in the sheep. Awareness opens our eyes, intimacy fills our hearts, stewardship disciplines our hands, and compassion completes our lives. The progression is deliberate. Jesus leads us from perception to transformation. The end-time church, if it truly understands this, would stop chasing prediction and start pursuing presence. It would stop fearing judgment and start living mercy. And yet, this isn't a call to endless striving. It's an invitation to abide. The sheep didn't earn their place. They simply lived close enough to the shepherd to reflect his nature. They loved without realizing it because their hearts had been rewired by grace. This is what readiness looks like when it matures. It becomes love without calculation. The oil has turned to flame, the faith to fruit, the waiting to worship. There's a quiet power in realizing that Jesus' final message before his death was not a warning, but a revelation of what the kingdom truly values. He spoke of thrones and judgment, but his gaze was tender. He wanted his disciples to understand that all prophecy, all theology, all waiting leads to this: love that does not grow cold. When he returns, he will not look for those who shouted the loudest about his coming, but for those who loved most like him in his absence. So how do we live this now? We start where the sheep started, in the ordinary. The person in need beside you is your proving ground of readiness. The friend who feels forgotten is your test of oil. The stranger you could easily overlook may be the moment when heaven leans close to see if the flame still burns. Every act of compassion becomes a secret signal to the returning king. I am awake, my lamp is still burning. This is the final secret Jesus hid in Matthew's parables. The code was never meant to keep us guessing, it was meant to keep us growing. The bridegroom's delay is not neglect, it is mercy, giving us time to love more deeply, to serve more freely, to carry his heart into a world growing colder by the day. The final parable completes the sequence with divine simplicity. Awareness awakens, intimacy sustains, stewardship proves, compassion fulfills. When these four move together, the bride is ready. And so, the story ends where it truly begins, with love. Not a fragile emotional kind, but the steady, unbreakable love that keeps its lamp burning through the longest night. That is the code buried in Matthew's end-time parables. That is what the bridegroom is coming to find. When Jesus spoke his parables, he wasn't hiding truth to confuse us. He was concealing it within stories so that only hearts truly hungry would discover it. Every detail, every image, every phrase was a doorway for those willing to seek deeper. In Matthew's final sequence, we see the clearest map of spiritual readiness anywhere in Scripture. He begins with a fig tree stretching its branches toward light, ends with a shepherd separating his flock, and between those two moments lies the entire story of discipleship. The journey moves from seeing the signs to becoming the sign, from expectation to embodiment. The code buried in these parables is not about unlocking secrets in history, but awakening secrets in the heart. The fig tree reminds us that the signs of the times are not just in the world, but within us. The 10 virgins remind us that waiting is not passive. It's the place where love is refined. The talents remind us that every gift has purpose, and that faithfulness in obscurity is as sacred as miracles in the spotlight. The sheep and goats remind us that love is the final test of truth. When you weave them together, the picture becomes clear. Jesus was training his followers to live ready by living transformed. This readiness is not frantic or fearful. It's quiet, confident, rooted in relationship. It's the steady flame that survives delay because it draws from oil that never runs dry. When the bridegroom comes, he will not be searching for those who predicted the timeline perfectly, but for those whose love endured through delay, whose lamps still glowed even when others went dark. The parables call us to turn our eyes inward and ask hard questions. Am I awake to the season around me? Is my lamp burning with intimacy? Am I faithful with what I've been given? Do I love in ways that reveal his nature to the world? These are not checkboxes. They are reflections of a heart aligned with heaven. Every parable becomes a mirror. The more you study them, the more they study you. They reveal what you value, what you fear, what you trust. And in that revelation lies both comfort and conviction. The comfort of knowing Jesus has prepared his church with divine precision, and the conviction that the time to awaken is always now. When you begin to see it this way, prophecy is no longer about panic or speculation. It becomes a call to intimacy. Readiness becomes joy, not anxiety. You begin to understand why Jesus spoke in parables, so that truth would bypass intellect and reach the soul. Those who are willing to listen will find that every story carries a heartbeat, and that heartbeat is love. So as you step away from this message, let this realization settle deep within you. The secret code in Matthew's end-time parables is not something to crack, it's something to become. It's the life of a believer whose eyes are open, whose heart is aflame, whose hands are faithful, and whose love is real. And when the night finally breaks and the bridegroom calls, those who have lived this code won't be caught off guard. They'll be caught up in joy. Jesus, thank you for speaking through stories that reach beyond the surface, for planting truth deep enough that only love can uncover it. Today I come before you with an open heart. Forgive me for the moments I've let my oil run low, for the times I've been busy doing for you instead of being with you. Teach me to wait well, not in fear but in faith. Let my eyes stay awake to your presence even when the world grows dark. Fill me again with the oil of your Spirit, pure, steady, unending. Help me see you in the faces of those who suffer, in the ones the world forgets. Shape my heart until compassion becomes my reflex, not my effort. Strengthen my hands to serve, my voice to speak hope, my soul to rest in your timing. When you come, may you find me faithful, burning with love, alive in your truth. Amen. If this message stirred something in your heart, don't let it fade when the video ends. Take a moment to subscribe so you won't miss the next teaching that continues this journey through the hidden wisdom of Jesus' words. Share this video with someone who might feel distant or weary, someone whose lamp needs refilling. And leave a comment below. What part of Matthew's parables speaks most to your life right now? Your story might reignite someone else's faith. Next week, we'll uncover the mysterious link between the fig tree prophecy and the timing of awakening in the last days. Stay expectant, stay ready, and keep your lamp burning.